In a short time from now, President Obama will make his first State of the Union address to a Congress under divided control. Moments ago, I spoke to freshman Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky and asked about how they can balance the budget when the president is still proposing more spending hikes. Please take a listen. Senator Paul, welcome.
Good to be with you.
Let me ask you this. We know that Obama is going to be proposing some spending increases, which comes as a surprise. I just want to ask you flat out, as new senator, can we ever balance the budget again in this country?
Absolutely. We're going to introduce a balanced budget. We think the Republican alternative to $2 trillion in debt should be a balanced budget, not a $1 trillion debt. You know, during the Bush years, we doubled the debt. The Democrats are tripling the debt, so we're going to introduce a budget that will actually balance.
All right, so look, the bond market is worried about this. The dollar market is worried about this. Some inflation commodities are worried about this, not least of which is the price of gold. Tell me more about your balanced budget. Who's going to be in with you? Who's going to be co-sponsoring this? And you're talking about, again, a conflict with the Obama administration because they're nowhere near it.
Well, so far we have most of the American people with us on it. We have less people involved here in Washington, but there will be some. The first bill we've introduced today is not actually a budget, but I've introduced $500 billion in cuts. It starts with 2008 levels for everything other than Medicare and Social Security and the military, but then it goes beyond the 2008 levels. For Department of Education, we eliminate most of it. We send some of it to other departments and eliminate the department. We take the Department of Energy. Some of it can be done in the Defense Department and has defense connotations, but most of it we eliminate. We think that many of these functions that have gravitated to Washington in the last 30 years are best handled by the states and the cities. I think the people are with us. I'm unafraid to produce these things, and I think the people will support it.
Senator, what about entitlement reform? Is there any prospect at all in this coming session for entitlement reform, Medicare, Social Security, and maybe rolling back Obamacare as well?
Yes. I mean, in my primary and in my general election, I said the age for Social Security will have to go up. Not because of you or I, well, maybe you. Some of these baby boomers had too many kids after the war.
That's me.
Yeah, and I tell people that's not my fault. I had nothing to do with it, but I do say that we will have to raise the age of eligibility gradually. They did it during Reagan's era. We raised it 1 month a year. You could go to 70, but do it over 36 years. People would not feel the pain. There'd be some pain. But you'll have to do it in order to shore up. That fixes most of the Social Security problem. You could probably do the same for Medicare and fix a lot of the Medicare problems.
All right. What about the dollar's role in this calculus? I mean, in terms of a growth plan, you have a balanced budget plan. You sort of walk through some of the issues. What about the dollar's role in this process?
Well, I think the dollar's value and the debt are interlinked. I mean, the dollar loses its value because we have to monetize debt. We have an enormous amount of debt. People say, well, I don't want a central bank. Well, we have a central bank because we have debt. And that's how we finance our debt. And I think you can preserve value of dollar by having less debt. But, you know, we created an enormous amount of money. I'm still worried about what we created in 2007, 2008. I'm not a famous economist like some folks, but I do think there is a lag time sometimes between the time you create the money, by the time it filters into the economy. And also we learned one important thing about inflation. It can hit one sector. Housing prices doubled and tripled. I'd call that inflation. The Federal Reserve says, oh, we had no inflation for the last 10 years. Well, we certainly did if you looked at housing prices.
We've got a big bulge in food prices, a big bulge in energy prices. We've got a big bulge in raw material industrial prices. Robert Zoellick, the head of the World Bank, famously said the dollar should be referenced to gold. Is that something that you might press in your role in the Senate?
I think there is a value in it. Even Greenspan, who at one time was a fan of gold, said throughout his tenure that he followed and tried to keep the price of the dollar within a range of gold. So in some ways, Greenspan, while we were on no gold standard, unofficially tried to keep us linked to a gold rule or a price rule. That's not perfect because he then abandoned it, as well as abandoning capitalism somewhere along the way as well. But I think, yeah, some kind of link. Hayek talked about a basket of currencies. People have talked about a link. A link is good, and it restrains people, but it's really all tied into the size and scope of government. If government ran balanced budgets and surpluses, we wouldn't worry so much about the loss of the value of the dollar. We lose the value of the dollar because they have to monetize the debt to pay for our
Now, finally, I'm going to bet that President Obama tonight will do some crowing about economic recovery. I mean, look, the stock markets have been surging. GDP is coming out on Friday for the fourth quarter. It may be 4% for all we know. That's a pretty hefty number. Do you think Obama should take credit for the economic recovery and the stock market rally?
He's going to talk a lot about recovery. He's going to need to come to Kentucky and talk about 1 in 10 people still out of work. We've had unemployment, above 9% for 20, 24 months now. Housing prices have fallen for 53 months. There's still some bad news out there. And what I'm more concerned about is the structural problems that we face with our budget that I think are a drag on the economy. I'm also concerned. You remember back in the Depression when they changed the reserve requirements, and that was a big deal on maybe furthering the Depression, having more reserves kept in the banks. I think financial regulatory bill could be a bigger burden, like the change in the requirements were on reserves in the 30s, such that we may well have a stifling of loaning and a stifling of the banking community at the community level that really could exacerbate the recession.
And speaking of overregulation, do you expect any possibility that President Obama would accept amendments and changes in Obamacare, which some people believe is a big jobs destroyer?
Well, I've been predicting ever since the election that he's going to use Bill Clinton as his role model, and you've already seen that in his rhetoric. The question is, will any of his actions match his rhetoric? Now, he did make a compromise on extending the Bush tax cuts. To me, the compromise, or the better compromise, would have been we should have added spending cuts to the tax extensions. But he still did show a willingness to work with Republicans. We'll see. I'm not sure how much he will compromise. But I think the interesting thing is I don't think his core philosophy has changed. He truly, at his heart, is a progressive. He believes that the role of government is to fix economic and social ills. And so what I think will happen is he believes that, but the conundrum is on the other side, he sees this deficit crisis, this debt crisis, and he's restrained by it. And I think all of Washington is waking up, Republican and Democrat. We have to do something about the debt.
Is that populist Tea Party restraint, does that mean free market capitalism is still alive?
I hope so. And,
optimistic or pessimistic?
I'm very optimistic about American capitalism. I like to call it America's system. American capitalism is such a great thing. And think of how we're thriving despite all of the government regulation. But I do think that the problem is, like with lowering corporate income tax, if we don't do it soon, we just keep losing all of our businesses overseas, because our corporate taxes are higher, our regulatory burden is higher, and our labor costs are higher. It's amazing we have any business left.
Well, many, many thanks to Senator Rand Paul. And let me just say, I am very optimistic about the outlook for free market capitalism.